thought I'd begin by asking, why is it that none of you are wearing a necktie? Changing social values. How'd you know that you didn't have to wear a necktie to come here?
I live within those values.
And it was just obvious to you coming to shul, but
it's a weekday, it's uncomfortable.
It's a weekday, it's uncomfortable. Okay. Anybody wear neckties at work? They're still at work. Okay. I also notice that everybody is wearing socks.
It's cold.
Why are you wearing socks? Because you're wearing shoes. Why do socks and why can't you wear shoes without socks?
Get a blister.
They can put a man on the moon. They can't invent shoes that you don't need socks for.
Oh, yeah. Sandals.
You know, it's interesting. The shul has a little guide for first-time visitors, and it tells you what to expect if you come on Shabbat morning, and it says some things at what to wear. It doesn't say anything about wearing socks. That's entirely left out. We left that out of the shul's guidelines about how to dress. It doesn't say anything about wearing socks. It doesn't say virtually everyone who comes here for at least 10 months of the year wears socks. We left that out. Why do we leave that out?
Because it's understood.
It's just understood. It's understood. So I guess that's our theme of the evening, is when our behavior is derived from things that are just understood, and when we have to read about things to learn what to do. Okay? That's going to be our big question for tonight. So Michel Epstein was born in Belarusia in 1829. He learned in the Volozhin Yeshiva, the great. Volozhin is they called it the mother of the yeshiva. Volozhin was the first modern yeshiva. Before Volozhin, their yeshivot were small. They were supported by local communities. The rabbi of the town would run the yeshiva. He might have a student or two. Volozhin was a large institution. It was a modern institution insofar that it had an administration, and it had fundraisers, and it had a dormitory, and there were students who came from all over Europe to study there. It was the first modern yeshiva in that sense, like a big institution that had that kind of fame. It was founded by Reb Chaim of Volozhin, interestingly enough, and right after the death of the Vilna Gaon. So it sort of is that moment where Lithuanian Misnagdic, anti-Hasidic Orthodoxy realized it had to kind of come up with something a little more compelling if they wanted to resist the Hasidim. So they invented the yeshiva as this institution that was going to inculcate their vision of Judaism, and Volozhin sparked, a dozen daughter yeshiva all over Eastern Europe that were, in the same model, and they, still exist today. All the great yeshivot in Bnei Brak and Yerushalayim, etc. They all trace themselves back to Volozhin, and they often in a very direct way. Like they could tell you, their Rosh Yeshiva studied at this yeshiva, and that he studied at Volozhin, or he was studied at Slutsk, which was a daughter yeshiva of whatever, or Telz, some yeshiva that was a breakaway from Volozhin. Volozhin was shut down by the Russian government in, I believe, 1890 there, 1880s, 1880s. All right, within 5 years of 1890, it was shut down by the Russian government, but the other yeshivot existed, and it still exists today. So he studied at Volozhin, but then he took on a position as a rabbi in a place called Novoskhiba, I don't know how to pronounce that, 1862, and his childhood rabbi, Rabbi Yehiel Goldberg, gave him smicha. So did the Tzemach Tzedek, who was one of the Chabad rabbis. Menachem Mendel Lubavitch also gave it because he lived in a town with a big Lubavitcher influence. In 1874, he was appointed the rabbi in Novordik, and that's where he wrote his magnum opus, the Arukh HaShulchan. You can see it took many, many years to publish. Each volume took several years to publish. I think often when people would sell books, you would buy them on a subscription, and it would be several years until you got everything. So I'm publishing my new book on Choshen Mishpat in 1884, and by 1893, all 3 or 4 however many volumes it was, were all printed, and the subscribers would all get them, and then he would do Yoreh Deah, and then Orach Chaim, and Even Ezer he completed in 1906. He dies in 1908. He also, so this work, Arukh HaShulchan, is modeled on the Shulchan Aruch. Were some of you here last week, or it's a... Two of you, okay. Three of you, okay. Some of you were not, though. So one of the great things about the Shulchan Aruch is that it in adopting the same codification system that had been used earlier by the Torah in the 14th century, the Shulchan Aruch in the 16th century adopts that same division of practical halakha, observed portions of Jewish law, can be divided into 4 sections, okay? Just Choshen Mishpat, which is interpersonal rules, damages, Yoreh Deah, which is ritual laws, Hilchot Nida, Hilchot Kashrut, Hilchot Mila, all ritual laws, Orach Chaim, the laws of daily prayer, brachot, tefillah, waking up in the morning, Hilchot Shabbos, Hilchot Yom Tov, Hilchot Pesach, the daily calendar and the annual calendar, and Even Ezer, which is marriage and divorce and all the permutations therein. So that codification, that division of practical halakha to 4 areas goes back to the 14th century with Yaakov ben Arush in Spain when he wrote the Torah. Shulchan Aruch, Yosef Karo, uses that same classification system when he writes his scholarship, the Beit Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch. And so Orach Chaim, Siman, 539 is about Kol HaMoed, the intermediate days of Pesach and Sukkot, and that was true in the Beit Yosef and the Torah, and it's true in the Beit Yosef, it's true in the Shulchan Aruch. The Aruch HaShulchan adopts that same codification system. That's all by way of saying he uses that same codification system as was earlier, which just means it makes it easier to find what you're looking for. So you could read a section of Shulchan Aruch, and then you could look up that same exact siman, that same number, Orach Chaim number 539, and I can see its treatment in the Aruch HaShulchan. Okay, it's not a true code. It's more of a. The style is different. It's sort of for each siman, each section in the Shulchan Aruch, the Aruch HaShulchan has a 1, 5, 30, 40 paragraph discussion on that topic in which he will summarize the relevant Talmudic passages, summarize the medieval positions, talk about what the Shulchan Aruch says, and then summarize as well the practical conclusions of the post-Shulchan Aruch 17th century, 18th century, 19th century halachic works, and then offer his own guidance as well. But it's not written in code form. It's like halachic essays, but on topics. So you can read a ruling in the Shulchan Aruch, and then go to the Aruch HaShulchan and read a very scholarly analysis of that topic that brings it up to the present date in the end of the 19th century. That's the style of the Aruch HaShulchan. After he died, there were some other writings of his that were published called the Shulchan Aruch Le'atid, the Aruch HaShulchan Le'atid, the future Aruch HaShulchan, which includes all of the sections of Jewish law that were not in the Shulchan Aruch that are, for the future. So that includes, so he wrote on Zrayim and all of the agricultural laws that are only relevant for Eretz Yisrael. The Torah didn't include them, so the Shulchan Aruch doesn't include them. Even though Rav Sakaro lived in Eretz Yisrael, he didn't include that because he adopted the codification system of the Torah. Aruch HaShulchan wrote about that. It was published from 1838 and 1946. So it was, 1938. Between 1938 and 1946, so a long time after he died, those writings were published. And then Sanhedrin, Mamre, Melachim, Shkalim, Kinsha Chodesh, these other kind of topics relating to Jewish governance and the calendar and kings and all that stuff was published in 1962. And Kudshim on the sacrificial order was published in 1969. So you can buy, I think the shul has a copy as well, if I'm not mistaken. I've never learned it, but I assume it's a similar style, but it's Aruch HaShulchan Le'atid. It's sort of the future topics, where, some of which are in fact now quite relevant if you're a farmer or eat fruit and vegetables in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, it is quite relevant for some, but it was not relevant for him, and that's what he called it.
Who found them? There's a big gap between.
It is a big gap. I don't know what the story. I don't know if it was hidden. I don't think it was. There's actually. My understanding is that there's an awful lot that still exists in manuscript, even by really important people, that even today has never been printed. And certainly in the there are many great medieval scholars who had works of theirs that weren't printed until the 20th century. Right? Rashi, you don't get more famous than Rashi. Okay, the all-time top 5 Rishonim. His Sheilot Utshuvot were not printed until the 20th century. I think the 1930s. And there are other great, the Ritva on Masechet, whatever, was not published, printed until 1850, which was 400 years after he lived. So I don't know, I can't tell you why. So that's not really, which is your question, or how. I can't answer that either. I can just tell you that it is a true thing about the history of Jewish printing that even really great works sometimes don't get printed until a long time later. His son was also famous. I had the thought too late to actually do it. His son was a banker. He was a rabbi, but he worked as a banker, but he wrote a few books as well. He was Baruch Levi Epstein. He wrote a book called, he's most famous for a book called the Torah Tamima, which is he actually wrote it for people who were bored in shul, to read during Kriyas Torah so they wouldn't talk. He goes verse by verse, and he collects on the page all of his favorite midrashim, verse by verse, and then he explains how the Midrash read the verse. So it's
tomorrow,
what?
I think it's tomorrow.
Well, I got it.
Cross-references.
Cross-references rabbinic literature. I think midrashim also, not just Gemara. But it's a cross-reference to rabbinic literature. Thank you. Right. And then he has his, also his commentary. So you can just read pasuk by pasuk, verse by verse to get great. What did the Chazal say about this? What did the Rabbi say about it? And then how did they read that? And then you can see his explanation of that. So he was a banker, but that was a project he wrote. He also wrote a autobiography called Makor Baruch, which is a 5-volume autobiography, which I imagine has great material about our topic, which I thought of too. I own it. It's a 5-volume, cool, pretty fun book. But I didn't look to see some fun stories about his father. But that would be an interesting thing to look at. So just in terms of just thinking about who had the writings and where were the manuscripts, what happened to the family. I don't know. He was also related because he was related by marriage to the Netziv, Neftali Yehuda Berlin, right? Because his
he wrote a famous sefer, My Uncle the Netziv. They translated.
Makor Baruch was translated into English.
Called My Uncle the Netziv.
By Art Scroll, called My Uncle the Netziv.
Yeah.
And it was withdrawn. It was a yeshiva sent it out as a fundraising book.
Lakewood did.
And then they took it back.
Yeah.
Because of it's a little aside, a very interesting character. Reina Batya, who was, I guess, Baruch Levi Epstein's stepmother, I think, right? She must have been the sister. She was maybe the sister of the Netziv, and she was married to. All right. I didn't think I would talk about the family genealogy, so I didn't review this. But she was a woman that Baruch Levi Epstein knew through his. She was related to him, and she was a very learned woman, and she was very bitter about the status of women in Judaism. And she told him all these things about her bitterness and her anger and her frustrations, and he debated her. And he recorded their debates in this book and discusses also all these other learned women in Jewish history and their contributions to Torah scholarship. It's a really interesting source. He may have made up some of the sources as well, but we don't know, and we don't know how much of it is an accurate portrayal of her, but as a literary character, she's a very powerful figure. The English translation tones her down a lot, but not enough. And the book was withdrawn. But the Hebrew original, I have it. You can read that chapter if you want. It's a cool, cool thing. Reina Batya. But he was related. This also he was related to the Berlin family, who was the last Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin. Was the Netziv. Neftali Yehuda Berlin was the last Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin when the Russian government closed it down. This is also another tangent, but okay. This is also a very important story in the mythology of the yeshiva world, because the founding myth of the yeshiva was that the Netziv shut down the yeshiva himself rather than allow the teaching of Russian in the yeshiva. The reality is that the Russian government shut it down because they wanted to make it like a mostly Russian institution and dramatically change it. It wasn't that the Netziv was better to close down the yeshiva than allow it to be tainted by any secular subjects. The Russians really thought of the yeshiva as a threat and wanted to dramatically change its curriculum, and that's when the yeshiva closed. But the Netziv was the last Rosh Yeshiva. He's very famous today because he wrote a very, very popular Torah commentary. He gave a parsha class in the yeshiva that became a very popular Torah commentary. He had a number of children, among them Rabbi Chaim Berlin, who the first yeshiva in America is Yeshiva Chaim Berlin, named after that son of the Netziv. And he had another son who became a Zionist and moved to Israel, and that's who's Rabbi Meir Bar Ilan. Berlin became Bar Ilan, and Bar Ilan University is named in his honor. So that's this, Lithuanian aristocracy of Lithuanian Jewry. Okay, the Hasidim have their dynasties, the Litvaks, the Snagdim, we also have our dynasties as well. So
That's funny.
Yeah. So you've heard of Bar Ilan University? So
Yeah, I know. It's just funny.
That's like the
Hebraicism.
Yeah, but it's the same family. That's it. It's the same family. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same.
Wow, cool.
Okay. So I have the first Hebrew source is from his introduction. He writes. It's a beautiful passage, my favorite. So that's why. Kol machloket hatanaim v'amoraim v'gaonim v'aposkim v'emet mevin devar lo shiro divrei elokim chayim hema. All of the disputes of the Tanaim, the early rabbinic rabbis, and the rabbis of the Mishnah, and the Amoraim, the rabbis of the Gemara, the Gaonim, and the Poskim, all of the scholars, all of their disputes, all their arguments, to somebody who really understands what's going on, they're the words of the living God. Ulukulam yesh panim b'halacha. They all have some relevance for halacha. The Adarabah, and the opposite. This is the splendor of our Torah, that we have machloket, we have disputes, we have different perspectives. Right? The Torah is called, in Sefer Dvarim, the Torah is called a shira, song. What's musical about the Torah? Tiferet hashir hi kishakolot mishonim zemizeh. What makes music beautiful? Harmony. Polyphonic diversity. It's the different voices together that make music beautiful. V'zeu ikar hanimut. That's the source of its pleasantness. It's the resonance of two different notes, or the cello and the trombone. Umisha mishatet b'yam tamud yireh ni'imot mishonot b'chol hakolot mishonot zemizeh. Anybody who swims in the sea of Talmud will experience this beauty, this pleasantness from all the different voices. So that's what he wrote. He wrote an essay, a running commentary in the Shulchan Aruch that gives bottom line instructions, so it's code-like, but also just embraces and welcomes and shares, relishes that machloket. This position, that position, right? It's all there in his writings, which make it a little bit less convenient if you just, as a code, but make it a wonderful resource for understanding a halachic topic. If you want to read through a book, a work, to really have a picture of a halachic topic, Arukh HaShulchan is really a wonderful way to go, because he starts with fundamentals and concludes with practical guidance, but does everything in between. He wants to share that beauty. Okay, why did I talk about socks and neckties when we began? So in 1990 was 1997, so it's a little more than 20 years ago. Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, who's the son of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, also from the same family as well, at least on his mother's side. Chaim Soloveitchik was at the Volozhin Yeshiva, and then he left and moved to Brisk and opened his own yeshiva. So he had been Volozhin also. They're all there, okay? And he formed his own yeshiva in Brisk, and the Brisker yeshiva would all descend from Chaim Soloveitchik of Brisk, but he originally had been in Volozhin. Actually, I saw the etrog box that was given to Chaim of Brisk from the administration of the yeshiva Volozhin as a gift. It's like it's inscribed to Chaim Soloveitchik from the Hanhalat Yeshiva of Pelezhim. It's pretty cool. Chaim Soloveitchik of Brisk had two sons, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik and Rav Velvel Soloveitchik. Rav Moshe came to the United States and taught at Yeshiva University, and his son Rav Joseph Soloveitchik was in Boston and also taught at Yeshiva University of New York. And his son Aaron Soloveitchik has no T in his name and was in Chicago. Rav Velvel Soloveitchik moved to Jerusalem and established the Brisker Yeshiva in Jerusalem, which has several offshoots now as well. I was at one of those yeshiva last week at a bris of a cousin, and they were telling me about all the Brisker Yeshiva that they knew about and one that they studied at, and but they only knew about that branch of the family. They didn't know about the American branch. That was not on their list. Anyway, 1997, Chaim Soloveitchik writes an article called Rupture and Reconstruction, the Transformation of Contemporary Orthodoxy. It's actually, you can find it for free on the internet now very, very easily. It's very, very worth reading, and it's very worth reading the footnotes as well. It's a very, have you read it? It's an important piece of scholarship, and he tries to explain how the orthodoxy he knew as a child no longer exists. That's basically right, and why is that? And that's like that's sort of the, so it's scholarly, but it's also personal. What happened between 1950 and 1997? And he says what happened is rupture and reconstruction. Traditional Judaism broke down, and when it was reconstructed as a text-based religion, instead, and replacing what had been a mimetic tradition.
What word is that?
Mimetic,
Meaning?
like based on copying and behavior. So this is a process that took a long time, but it sort of really, like, he could see it between 1950 and 1990, right? But it goes back really in the breakdown of traditional Jewry in the late 19th, early 20th century, especially World War I, World War II, and then as it's reconstructed, it's a text-based religion. So here's a paragraph from one of his footnotes. Yisrael Meir HaKohen, Mishnah Brura. Oh, sorry, that's the foot. This 6-volume work, which has been photo offset innumerable times, was initially published over the span of 11 years, 1896 to 1907, and appears contemporaneous with the Arukh HaShulchan. Bibliographically, this is correct. Culturally, nothing could be farther from the truth. Though born only 9 years apart, their temperaments and life experiences were such that they belong to different ages. The Arukh HaShulchan stands firmly in a traditional society, unassaulted and undisturbed by secular movements in which Rabbinic Judaism still moved easy in harness. Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen, better known as Chavetz Chaim, stood throughout his long life in the forefront of the battle against Enlightenment and the growing forces of socialism and Zionism in Eastern Europe. Arukh HaShulchan was still a traditional rabbi. He was also a communal rabbi in Novordik, so he was saying what people did, actually. He was a communal rabbi, and he operated with a sense of an intact tradition. If you live in an intact tradition, you assume that what people do is correct. Okay, so if I want to know how much matzah do I have to eat on Pesach, it would never occur to me to look in a book to find that out. Because every year of my life, I sat at the Seder, and my Zaidi broke off a piece of matzah and gave it to me. And everyone I knew, their Zaidi also broke off a piece of matzah and gave it to them. And we don't, right? And we know, and we have that self-confidence in our intact traditions that we go along with that. Just as none of you had to look in a book to know that it's appropriate to wear socks today, none of you had to look in a book to know that it was okay to come here without a necktie. Like that, it's sort of something that we just pick up from a culture that we're fully situated in, without even having to subconsciously learn. So for Arukh HaShulchan, halacha worked that way. Judaism still functioned that way. If people did something, if frum Jews did something, it must be correct. And the job of the scholar is to figure out why it's correct. Mishnah Brura, written really around the same time by a Rosh Yeshiva, not by a community rabbi, by an elitist in the ivory tower, his commentary on Orach Chaim of the Shulchan Aruch does not share that same assumption. Mishnah Brura becomes increasingly popular beginning in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, really eclipsing Arukh HaShulchan in popularity. In fact, the newest edition of the Arukh HaShulchan is printed with the psak halacha of the Mishnah Berurah printed on the page, so that if he's lenient about something you should know, just don't get too, don't go pro-relax. If the HaShulchan is lenient, the Mishnah Berurah is strict about this, that, and the other point here. Maybe they should print the Mishnah Berurah with the psak of the HaShulchan in the margins. But that's not what they've done. No one has done that yet.
So because Mishnah Berurah is reacting to these
Mishnah
social
Berurah-
and cultural forces, that's more strict? Or?
No. Thank you, that's a good question. Mishnah Berurah is acting in a society which is orthodox, in a society where there are alternatives, and where tradition has broken down, and where people, there's no self-evident confidence that we're all doing the right thing.
Right.
So if you want to know what the right thing is, you have to look in the books. And you look in the books, sometimes they're strict, sometimes they're lenient, but sometimes they're strict. So when you look up, let's figure out how much matzah we should eat. It's like, oh my goodness, the Noda B'Yehuda, makes a compelling argument that we should be eating much, much, much larger quantities of matzah. So he wrote that in the 16th century, 17th century, whatever, okay? A long time ago. But it wasn't until the 1950s that people started changing their behavior at Pesach to correspond with the Noda B'Yehuda. Because a traditional Jew would never change what his Zaidi did at the Seder because of what he read in a book. Okay? An Orthodox Jew would. Okay? Somebody who lives in a text-based tradition would do that. Yeah.
So, I had a grandfather from Europe and everything, so when I first went to Yeshiva, I did the thing, I had the charter and everything.
Yeah.
So I told my Zaydi, he has to eat this portion. He yelled at me, he said, this is what I got from my father. He broke up with me.
I did the same thing.
Yes.
So it wasn't,
Not with
my Zaydi knew what to do, and I learned from my Zaydi because what his father did.
Yeah, right. So in a traditional society, everyone is just doing what their Zaydis do, and no one's questioning, and that. But that broke down, right? And so now we turn to books for guidance. It's the Mishnah Berurah himself. He's not, because we have his Kiddush cup. His granddaughter had this Kiddush cup, so it was small, right? It was smaller than it should be based on his own writings. So even he, could, maybe had some awareness of I might. Some awareness of theoretically this seems to be what should be done, but everyone, I've made Kiddush every Shabbos of my life, and this is what everyone has for their Kiddush cups. So let's see a few examples. A couple of examples. Well, let's do the let's do some of the fun ones, right? Let's do on page 2. Let's do 75 to 7. Okay, this one. So, V'ata bo v'nitzavach al pirtzot zoreinu
Who wrote
Mm-hmm.
this? This is Arukh HaShulchan?
V'avonteinu harabim shezeh shanim rabot shenifritzu benot Yisrael bavon zeh v'hochot b'gilui harosh. Oh my goodness, so bad. In Lithuania, women have to go with their heads uncovered. That was true, right? Even rabbinic families, women didn't cover their heads in Lithuania. V'chol ma shetzaku al zeh hu lo lazer v'lo lo'il. And everyone yells about it, everyone complains, doesn't make any difference, doesn't help. V'ata hashta mispachat Shaha Nisuot Hochot Sarotan Kamoha Bitula. Now, married women, just like unmarried women, go around with their hair completely uncovered. Oilanu Sha'alta B'Yameinuka. Oy, woe is us that this happened in our generation. Mihu Al Kol Panim Ladina Nireh Shenutar Lan Lipalel Levarech Neged Rashehen Hamigula. Nonetheless, it seems to me that it is permissible for us men, to nonetheless daven and say brachot in the presence of women whose hair is uncovered. Since most women walk around that way. Just like, so it's really no different than her cheek or her hands or her wrists, a part of the body that's normally uncovered, and therefore is not considered to be a form of nakedness in the presence of which one cannot say tefillot or etc. Just as the Mordechai wrote, Mordechai was a medieval Ashkenazi halachist, lived in Germany, was killed in the Rheinfleisch massacres of 1298. This is what he said. All these naked parts of the body that are discussed in rabbinic literature, those are only things that are normally covered and not exposed. But in a non-married woman whose hair is always uncovered, that's not considered nakedness, right? So Mordechai is trying to understand why there seems to be a difference between the hair of married women and women and unmarried women. When the Gemara in Brachot that says hair, woman's hair is considered nakedness, does not make that distinction at all between married and unmarried. And the Sephardi poskim don't seem to make as much of a distinction between married and unmarried, and think that all hair should be covered. The Mordechai says in medieval Germany, unmarried women have their hair uncovered. So it seems to me that's fine because it's something that everyone is used to. It's no longer, it doesn't arouse any sexual, it's not sexually distracting because it's so commonplace. That's what the Mordechai wrote. And for us, it should be entirely the same for married women, right? There's no difference because it's right. If the Mordechai could say that unmarried women's hair is no longer sexually distracting, because it's not covered, so too married women's hair is also not sexually distracting because it's commonly uncovered. So here you have him. He's recognizing. So here he's not endorsing the practice of the women. That he's in this case. What he is doing is finding a validation for the practice of everyone else who sits at the Shabbos table and says Birkat Hamazon in the presence of uncovered hair, or goes to shul and davens in the presence of uncovered hair. That he is justifying, right? Because that's what his job was, okay? And that's what he did here. Let's do a few more examples.
What does he mean in brackets?
Rambam Hishmitu Legamri Din Se'ar V'Kol Mishum B'Svir Lehu Delav L'Kriyat Shema Itzmar Ayen Beit Yosef. So I guess the Rif and the Rambam leave out entirely the prohibition against davening or saying Shema in the presence of hair or voice, because they don't think that it has to do with that Kriyat Shema. We can check Arukh 75 and
Okay.
see it today. The one right above it, 544, is talking about the requirement to leave a portion of your home unfinished as a way to mourn the Beis Hamikdash. Right, you're supposed to have. And does anybody have a portion of the wall of your home uncovered, unfinished? Do you have like some unplastered, exposed brick to mourn the Beis Hamikdash? Anyone, right?
Probably, but it wasn't more than Beis Hamikdash.
Okay. So he says, so after a whole discussion, so now, so he says, we can be malam b'tzchut. We can, malam b'tzchut. We can, how do we translate that? We can, malam b'tzchut.
Excuse?
We can give an excuse. We can offer an excuse. We can teach an excuse. We can learn the sources in a way that provides merit to most Jewish people in our generation who don't. Most Jews who aren't careful about this rule. They don't leave a full square cubit unplastered in their homes. They just don't do that. A lot of sand is mixed up in the plaster. It's really half and half. Therefore, according to the strict law, it's not necessary because there's sand mixed in, doesn't really count. They don't quote that position. That's because they don't want to, elaborate too much. But even within their positions, you can still make this argument to be that if you mix sand into the plaster, you don't have to leave a square cubit unplastered. Right? Because the Ran and the Yosef would have mentioned it since they were students of the Rif. So therefore, it's just like we've mentioned, and therefore, so it's not the most obvious way to read the earlier sources, but it's the way to read the earlier sources that he feels compelled to adopt, because that's what people are doing. Okay? The frum Jews of Novordik, who are traditional Jews living in an intact, still functioning like traditional sense, they must be doing the right thing. It's his job as a scholar to read the sources and come up with an argument for why they're doing the right thing. Okay. Skipping around, let's look over the last page. This is a fun one. These are good. Let's start with 103.11 in the middle. Katav Rabbeinu Arama, mihu dvarim hachashuvim kibirya o kiyotze ba ein im einam pigomim ba'atzmam af pi shepogmin hatavshil ein betelin afilu be'elef ad kan lishana. So the Rama writes, this is your idea, this is a kashu law. So again, Siman 103, very important Siman to learn in Shulchan Aruch about things that when impart a bad taste. So the Rama writes that when it comes to things that are important, that don't get nullified if they're mixed in a tarovet, such as a birya. Birya is a creature, an intact creature, like a mouse or a cockroach. Okay? A birya, right? It itself doesn't taste really, really bad. Even if it tastes bad in the mixture, then it's not going to be batel even 1,000 times its volume. Normally, right? Okay, let's back up. Some of you did this with Rabbi Yitzhak, right, a few weeks ago, right? So let's see how well you learned. Okay, if you have a piece of lard falls into your chicken soup and is melted away, it is nullified in 60 times its volume. If a mouse falls into your chicken soup and melts, and can't be found, it is not nullified because the mouse is a birya. It's a complete intact organism, and so even in 1,000 times its volume, it's not nullified. Now this is true even if the mouse doesn't fall into your chicken soup, it falls into your rice pudding, where it's really not going to enhance the flavor of the right? I would think a little mouse flavor in your rice pudding, right? No one wants that. But because the mouse itself is tasty, if it's a field mouse, then it's not going to be nullified. That's the Rama. That's the Rama Ishul's comment on the Shulchan Aruch, Siman 103. Your idea. V'dai ki hu sharei b'birya ein holchin achar nitznat tam ela achar chashivuta u'lechen kashiv b'atzma eina pigima adayin chashivuta alei. Okay, uvar lehedja midvarav de'im hi b'atzma piguma gam kein betela la chashivuta u'betela. Period. Okay. So he's sort of reading very precisely the Rama and saying, when it comes to a birya, it comes to a complete creature, its status as a complete creature that gives it importance and significance. Also, an entire organ also is a birya. So if you have the entire sciatic nerve falls into your mixture, it also isn't nullified. You're not allowed to eat the sciatic nerve, right? That's the part of the sirloin you have to take out. But if the whole thing falls in, it's also a birya. It's not nullified in 60 because it's a complete thing. So that importance that it has, its non-nullification is a function of its importance and status as an intact thing, not because of the taste that it gives, just because a birya doesn't give more taste than, right? I have a mouse that's like 3 cc's in volume. It's not going to give more taste than 3 cc's volume of lard cubes, in my chicken soup. But it's the importance of the item as a complete intact mouse that is going to prevent it from being nullified. So far, so good? Therefore, if the item itself is not a field mouse, which tastes good, but a city mouse, which tastes rancid, then it doesn't have that status, doesn't have that importance. That's his read of the Rama. That's his understanding.
If it's both intact.
Even though it's intact, but it tastes.
One has a positive potential taste, or one.
So they both have a negative potential taste in your rice pudding,
Right.
but one is itself the etzem, a nasty thing that doesn't taste good, and the other thing is something which, on its own or in the right context, would taste very good.
Got
Okay? In medieval London, they used to have a big problem. People would sell city mice and pretend they were field mice for food. Okay? Field mice are tasty, city mice are not. The Gemara discusses this. Find a mouse in your beer. If it's you remove the mouse and all that's left is the taste. If it's a city mouse, you don't have to worry about it because whatever taste is left is rancid. If it's a field mouse, whatever taste that's left could be tasty. You have to make sure there's 60 times the volume of the mouse. That's if you remove the mouse, so all that's left is the...
Right.
So the rancid mouse?
I'm sorry?
I said, so the rancid mouse, it's not going to be, or it is going to be nullified because we take it out and it's not?
So if you take it out, then all that's left is the taste, and so if the taste makes it worse, then you don't have to worry about the taste. If the taste makes it better, you need 60 times the volume. If the mouse is in, it's not going to be nullified because it's a birya, but he says if it's a city mouse, or it's not a mouse but a cockroach, or something that is like just in itself, like just nasty and untasty, then it doesn't even have that chashivut. It's not considered a birya at all. That's his chiddush.
Really dependent. Like, what if there's a place where people, until this conversation, I would have assumed that field mice were just as disgusting as city mice.
You're a barbarian. You don't know finer. you don't know the finer finer things in life. Yeah.
I think people like raise cockroaches for food also.
No.
It's not
Okay, I understand it's an important point. Actually, it's a very important point. I think let's table that for now and assume that these things are a little more simple and objective for this discussion. But that's a fair point. And maybe the answer is it depends on the person who's eating the thing. Maybe that's how you would answer it. But that's.
But in a Jewish context too, like cockroaches are not kosher. You can't eat
Fine.
them.
Some non-kosher things are tasty, like right.
Sure.
Bacon is tasty.
Yeah,
Right.
Like, you don't have to agree that quickly, okay?
Yeah, I was like,
That's very enthusiastic. Okay.
What's the kind of conversation about this today with somebody? Is that
Okay.
not because it's not kosher, it means that it's not tasty?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, לפי זה, במילבין או תולעים המאוסים בעצמם, וכן זבובים ופרושים, וכיוצא בהן, all sorts of insects and creepy crawlies and worms that themselves are ichsa, you don't want to eat them. וכשיוצא בהן, כשנעבדו בתבשיל, if they fall into your food and you can't find them, like some fruit flies or something, or like little mealworms, fall into your food and you can't find them, you can't remove them. And you can't see them. It's not like, I can see them, but it's too hard to remove them. I can't see them at all. They're not visible. I know they're in there, okay? But I can't see them. I can't find them. I can't remove them. V'telim legamre. They're completely nullified. V'zeu k'mo shekatavnu b'sif kuf sif yud zayin. This is what I written, Siman in 100, paragraph 17, which is the next one. You can look at it if you want. Shalamanu zechut al Klal Yisrael, that this is a source of merit, right? I have lamanu zechut al Klal Yisrael. I have justified what Klal Yisrael do, which in 1905 nobody was using, light boards to check their romaine lettuce before eating it because they had not been invented yet. Okay. Okay. Ayin sham. V'yesh mi shomer de kavanato lebirya tova. כמו עוף טמא שנשרכה לגמרי עד שאינה ראויה לאכילת אדם כלל, אבל הבריות המאוסות מתחילת בריאתן אינו בטלים אפילו באלף, ותמהני דין כן היה לא לומר אם לא נפגעו בעצמן. Right. So maybe the Ramah, so he's claiming this is what the Ramah himself is intuiting or is implying, and something, no, the Ramah they were referring to some like bird that got spoiled, like a rance, whatever, some like non-kosher bird that people, some like ostrich steak that like got rotten or something. That's what he's talking about. And he's like, no, because he would have said that. It's as I've said. Mashma tampogim, it's kilat briyatan. These were things that were always nasty and yucky to eat, not things that became nasty and yucky to eat. They don't have the chashivut of a birya. Okay, so this is a tremendous thing with zchut. Okay, the kashrut agencies have stricter standards than this for vegetable checking in restaurants and homes, right? This is saying if the thing that you're looking for is a thing that the thought of eating is repulsive, and you would never eat it if you were chosen to, then it's it's not a birya, and it would be, even if it's intact, and therefore, if it's mixed up in your lettuce and your broccoli, etc., it's batel in 60 times as fine, like anything else. Okay, this is like okay, it's like cool guy, okay? Because not because he's lenient, okay? The leniency is whatever it is, what it is, What's so admirable is just to see somebody he looks around him and he says, this is like the Jewish people are embodying, the Torah, and it's my job to figure out why. The job of the scholar is to justify what people are doing, not to tell them all the ways they're doing things wrong. I think there's remains as a question how relevant, how accessible that spiritual, or that halachic stance, that legal stance is to us in the aftermath of this rupture and reconstruction. Can we go back to that kind of implicit trust of the Arukh HaShulchan? I would say when it comes to Pesach, I find myself torn into. I feel like my soul is torn into because I've learned the note of Yehuda. I understand the reasons why I should have a lot of matzah. But I also understand that for generations, that was not done. I know, I know how much matzah my father broke off at the Seder. I know, where he learned how to celebrate Pesach, and so I feel torn, right? Kind of product of the, of my time period, and so I feel that division. But I once had a conversation with somebody while I was in the waiting room, in the hallway at the headquarters of the CRC, the Chicago Rabbinic Council, and I was discussing the height of the mechitza in this shul, which is kind of low. Right? And I'd never taken a measuring tape. I don't know actually how low it is. I don't know. I'm really reluctant to actually, to take a measuring tape and actually find out how high it is and whether it is high enough. But I do know that the person who put it here, who built this building, I know his face is on the wall of the CRC. His portrait hangs on the wall as one of the past presidents of the organization, Rabbi Davis. So that's sort of what the Arukh, they are, that's somebody who functions as part of an observant community can be trusted to do the right thing, and if you see him doing something which seems to contradict something that you've learned about, your job is to learn better, to figure out why what he's doing is okay. There are a few other examples, so maybe we'll, but, and
the concept of zechut, the zechut of the people doing the things. That's it's really about the respect and the honor of these kind of figures. I'll just say, there's the theory, it actually may go back farther, okay? Yeah. This is my last 5 minutes, I'll say. It may go back all the way to the Crusades, because there's a bit of when the first Crusades came to the Rhineland, the Jewish communities, they massacred many hundreds of Jewish families on their way marching from France and Germany to Eretz Yisrael. And in many instances, Jewish families killed themselves in advance of the crusading armies, lest they be baptized against their will. And there are really harrowing stories from this period. A famous story of a man who went to Mayor of Rothenburg to ask what kind of penance he had to do because he had killed his whole family because the Crusaders were coming, and then in the end they didn't come to his town. And what was his penance? And these are, in the aftermath of a generation like that, the Ashkenazi Jewish community developed a powerful sense of its own righteousness, its own piety, and the correctness and authenticity of its own religious traditions. This was a very self-confident religious community in the aftermath of the First Crusade. They withstood that test. The Sephardi communities, by and large, didn't. Often the Sephardi communities were, accepted conversion rather than death. The Ashkenazi communities in the Middle Ages, by and large, accepted death rather than conversion. So this bred within the Ashkenazi community, the ones who survived, a real confidence in their, our practices. What we're doing, the way we daven, the way we practice halacha must be, right, we're not going to question what we're doing based on something I read in a book, because like our martyred parents and brothers and sisters and grandparents, they practice this way, so we can't question it. And so the very dawn of Ashkenazi Torah scholarship, or towards that, or after the Crusades, shortly thereafter, when really a generation later, when the Tosafists emerge, another big agenda of the Tosafists also is, well, this Gemara says this, but we do something else. So it must be da-da-da-da-da-da. The Tosafists rarely will say, change what you're doing because of this passage in the Gemara. They much more commonly will say, well, our practice is this, and let's sort of figure out a different way to understand the Gemara, to justify our practice. So Chaim Soloveitchik, again, thinks that comes from, that the experience of surviving the Crusades gave the Ashkenazi community that self-confidence. And that lasted up until the HaShulchan. And today it doesn't exist, right? Today, you want to learn what bracha to say, you want to learn how to daven, how to celebrate Pesach. There are books for all of those things. And the assumption is, I'll look in the book, and then I'll modify my behavior to correspond to the book. Because we no longer live in an intact traditional society. We no longer have that confidence. Like I once had a conversation, with a group of people from Michel, and more of us had communist grandparents than Orthodox grandparents. I don't know, right? Yes?
I think Orthodoxy is going even further to the right. It's not good enough to look up yourself, you have to ask the question.
Oh, right. Well, there are many trends. There are many trends, some good, some bad. There's also there are a number of different trends, correct? Correct.
Because I grew up, if you had a child, you looked up in the Shulchan Aruch, you looked up wherever you looked up, in the Mishnah Berurah, but I don't think they trust themselves.
Sorry, one more story about the Mishnah Berurah, I'll just say. Yeah. So the Mishnah Berurah, right, who Chaim Soloveitchik says is like the counterpoint. The Mishnah Berurah will very often say, when he offers two opinions, a lenient position, here's a strict, he'll say, a Baal Nefesh, somebody who is exceptionally pious. A Baal Nefesh, he should be strict about this matter or the other matter. So my teacher, Rabbi Yehuda Amital, he said that when he studied Mishnah Berurah in pre-war Hungary, when they came to passages like that in the yeshiva, he said, oh, a Baal Nefesh, somebody like the Mishnah Berurah, somebody like L'Chafetz Chaim, that's a Baal Nefesh. He should be strict. Someone like that should be strict about this matter. And today, 18-year-old kids in yeshiva read about a Baal Nefesh being strict about this. Oh, that's me. I should be strict about that. So that's another, kind of, another trend. That we no longer live in community. We no longer trust the communities where we live that they must be doing something correct. We don't trust necessarily ourselves to kind of look up something in a book and make a decision about a simple matter. And spiritual ambition is good, but maybe there's also sometimes an immature embrace of chumrot that are a little bit above our weight. All right. All right. Thank you so much. Next time we're meeting. We're not meeting next week because of Thanksgiving, whatever week. The week after that we are meeting on Tuesday because on Wednesday there is the APAC event. The David Horowitz is speaking. So at Michel. All right.
Who's APAC?
APAC is bringing David Horowitz.